we have the privilege of a storyteller. We don't usually have people that tell tall stories, but we've got one here, and he has heard a lot of really good ones, and even though he may not have first-hand a vision of them, he knows the stories. And but we'd like to get him to tell a little bit about how he got here and how he got associated with all these stories. So this is Terry Bronkema from the Clearbrook area.
Thank you, Jim. Okay, I'll start back with a brief history. We moved from Linden into the NookChat School District up on the Pangborn Road in 1965. I was an 8-year-old kid at that time, and we went from a very small city lot to a 15-acre farm that was an amazing place to grow up in. Swimming in the creeks and rafting down the creeks in the middle of February when my mother would go crazy because we would take inner tubes and homemade doors and raft down the creeks. I was fortunate enough, I don't know if how many of you remember it, I know Rod does, when they had the, what would they have called that? It was a migrant at the church, where we had like a little camp there every Friday night,
yeah,
or Saturday
in the
night.
Hall.
In the hall there, yeah.
Together.
And it was and it was basically for, at that time I believe they were mostly Canadian migrants. A lot of them were, with a few of the Hispanics coming up. And in those days I got to meet people like Elmer and Clara Anderson, who told me a lot of their stories. I worked for Hank Ehlers. Worked for him on his hay crews for several years. Was a good friend, very good friends with Warren Hinton, or Henry Hinton, whichever, I don't remember his actual first name, but it was always known as Warren to us. So, that being told, I guess I'll start out with Clara and Elmer talking about their son going rafting on, or canoeing on the Pangborn Lake, and not returning home. Pangborn Lake is actually one that they had at one time called a bottomless lake. It is, the official term for it is Pangborn muck, but it has no solid bottom until you're very, very far down. The Andersons, to recover their son's body, actually put some huge pumps and tried to pump the lake out so that they could retrieve their son's body. And they said that they had pumped for 3 days and they never moved the level of that lake at all. And so that was a story that was told to me by the Andersons, and that's a part of what I have to say.
Is it groundwater then?
No, it's artesian spring water.
Artesian spring.
It is it's funny, the water in the lake is actually a brownish color. When it comes through the creek, which goes right through my parents' property, when it goes through there, it's crystal clear, and we used to drink it all the time.
So it's taken on the color of the muck then?
It had earlier, yes.
Yeah.
My parents' property on the Pangborn Road was a really funny property, in the fact that the property was divided almost in half by the creek. And on the south side of the creek is all gravel. When they built their house, they built their newest house in 1974, and they had to take the top of a hill off, and it was all prime gravel. And then they actually, but when you got to the other side of the creek, and part of what was Ted Vanderveen's farm and all that was, it's that, what they call Pangborn muck, or what was commonly referred to as peat soil. It's got so much dead and decaying plant matter in it that it's it takes very little irrigation to grow crops there. Takes very little water. Whereas when you get into the gravel side, there's a lot more. Of course, the water just goes right through. They've had, before they moved off, they had rented that ground for many, many years to different operations, and everybody that rented it was just crazy about it. They thought it was some of the best ground they'd ever rented. But the bottom of that lake, of Pangborn Lake, which, Rod knows it well, and is for many years was rented by a lot of the doctors and lawyers around Linden, and Saul Lewis of the Linden Tribune. They leased the land around that lake, except for a portion that Clarence Coy had that he refused to rent to them. But they had their own hunting club up there, and a lot of ducks in those days.
So how did the Andersons get here?
I don't really know.
They were here a long time.
They've been here, yeah.
Do you know, Rod? When Andersons came?
What year was the big fire in there?
The big what?
Big fire.
In
1884 was the fire that burned all the county
And
off.
Otters lived there?
Hmm?
Johnny Otter lived
85, excuse me, it's 85.
there?
In February of
Yeah.
85.
We lived west of it,
Ah,
Ossipon.
and they came then. Or were they here then?
Huh?
Were they here during the fire?
Otter was, yeah.
Yeah.
That's Ledson's.
Do you know when or how the Andersons got here, Rod?
They came around 1900. They came from Minnesota, and they came up. The railroad had been in at that time, so when the railroad had been built, then it opened the country.
Mhm.
So they took over somebody else's homestead then.
Yes.
See, my grandparents came out here in 1919, excuse me. They came out in 1919, and by train.
Because it burnt and burnt.
See,
There weren't any roads yet, and there were very few cars.
Yeah.
So if you didn't come by water, you came by train.
I wonder how that, I have stories from Henry Ehlers, and Mr. Fulner has got a page out there, and it looks like where we lived was what they called a 159-acre parcel. That's what the name of it is on there, on your map. And Henry Ehlers lived just down the road, just I don't know, 200, 300 yards from our home. And like I said, I worked for him for several years. Rough and gruff, but I liked him. He had a lot of the old pictures, some of the tintypes. And he told stories to me about growing up there, and his father actually, his family, actually girdling trees, fir trees, and letting them sit in the field for 2 years, and then just lighting them like a torch, because they were too big for the family to take down. They were in the 8 to 12 foot, and most people in those days, other than the loggers, had an 8-foot crossbuck. And that was about as big a saw as you could actually buy. A lot of the old loggers I know would actually take two falling saws, and they would weld them together and have a double falling saw. And of course, some of the specialty saws were made that way too, as a double. They would be 16 feet long instead of 8.
Was it mostly cedar, or did they say?
They said a lot of it was fir. A lot of it was Douglas fir. There was quite a bit of cedar in there too.
Most of the cedar was taken out for shingles.
A lot of the cedar was taken out for
Around
shingles.
20th century.
Yeah. That, and that's, people don't believe it, but the town of Sumas at one time actually had more people in it than Bellingham did, which knew Whatcom at the time. and they were almost all shingle weavers. They had several plants and, you know, access to the railroads. And what they said was, as the shingle mills started to shut down, they had a rash of arson fires. And Rod probably remembers LeVon Hoffman talking about that. They had a rash of fires, and they couldn't figure out who was setting the fires. Until one day they went to get the fire, and the people were still moving their stuff out as they'd set the fire in their house to collect the insurance. As the shingle mills were shutting down. So, but Hank would tell me about, you know, they would take 6 and up to 8, you know, 6 and 7 foot trees they would take down and use them, split them, and use them as building materials. And where I lived, here again, a lot of fir, but a lot of also a lot of cedar. My property is actually what they call, at one time they called the Hinton Spur, which was actually a little town.
That was on the Pangborn?
No, excuse me, that's on the Clearbrook, or Van Buren Road.
And the Van Buren Road, okay.
I didn't move far, I gotta tell you. I moved, as a crow flies, I moved about 3/4 of a mile from where my parents, where I grew up, is where I ended up. I'm only about, you know, it's about a mile by road from where I grew up. Those of you who knew Doug and Georgia Rogers, if you knew them, they were my in-laws. They bought their property from Ruby Bartels, who had bought it from, I can't remember exactly who she'd bought it from, but it ended up, it had originally been one of the Hinton, part of the Hinton homestead. And there was what I have on my property to this day is I have the dormitory. The archaeologist says, looking at what she's seen, she says it was the dormitory for the train crews. As they would leave Canada, there was a dormitory there, and then the spur would continue onto the main line. I think that we predate that with the stagecoach road or the mail road. We have some concrete abutments around one of the little creeks on our property that was bridge abutments, but are now they're just lost in the weeds and timber now, or I shouldn't say timber, more like small alders and birches and things like that.
Is there any way to document that, or?
What we have, I actually, and I forgot I had it, but I do have documentation from one of the archaeologist sites. When the pipelines go through, they have to hire an archaeologist. I have 2 pipelines through my property. And when we started talking about that particular building, the archaeologist said that it may actually be on it may end up being on the historical sites, or as a historic monument, not monument either, but a historic building anyway. But she said we would have to apply for that, but we do have documentation that says at least it was a railroad dormitory. And I'm sorry I forgot that. I forgot I had it till just now, in fact. But like I said, I think it may predate that and go on a little bit earlier to the stagecoach when it ran through there.
Didn't Hinton's have a spur in?
That was the spur I was talking about. It went in there.
It was called the Hinton Spur.
And that's actually the dormitory for the train crews. We also had, and it's probably a bad thing that we did, but about as near as I could figure, 1984, 1985, we took out the Hinton Spur post office. It was an old log, all cedar building, and we were not aware of what it was until Orrin Hinton came out and said that was the post office for the whole area at that time. And I was not aware, we were not aware of that at the time, and we probably took it out in somewhere around 1984, I imagine. All cedar poles. We had to take it out because it was, even the cedar, after a while will rot. The whole bottom of it was starting to rot and fall back into the kind of the swamp or midden that's behind our house.
How big a building was it?
Oh, maybe 20 by 30.
Oh, it's a good size.
It was a good. We raised rabbits in it.
Hmm?
When my wife moved onto that property, that was her rabbit home hutch.
Oh.
She raised rabbits in there. And that's, she always had big dreams of a commercial rabbitry, and decided that was probably not what she really wanted to do after all. But well, we looked very hard into it right after we were married also, and in fact, my wife convinced my father-in-law, Doug Rogers, to roof over a bunker silo to put it in as a commercial rabbitry. And later on, we looked at it very hard, and of course, when we looked at it, money was easy, and they were paying almost nothing for domesticated rabbit, and so it just didn't pencil out. For the economics of it, just didn't pencil out.
Yeah.
Whether it would work or not now, I can't.
What kind of crops did Ehlers raise? in
Ehlers
those
were-
days?
Ehlers raised a lot of corn and a lot of berries. Bill and
What was the market for berries back in those days?
market for berries has always been pretty good. I mean,
Fresh fruit primarily?
fresh fruit and jelly. It's jelly is of course a lot easier to ship than fresh fruit. But they've years ago we had the Seattle market, which is now it's been taken over by California, but they took a lot of fresh fruit to
All hand-picked.
all hand-picked. Most strawberries are still hand-picked. Now, of course, we've had raspberries. Part of the reason for that is that the war in Yugoslavia or Czechoslovakia, their civil war completely destroyed their crop. And Whatcom County is almost unique in their ability to grow berries. The weather and the climate and the soils are just almost unique world. We are the #1 producer of berries in the world, or were.
But no more local pickers.
No more local pickers, all machine picked now.
I think probably everybody here has picked berries at one time.
I gotta admit, I picked strawberries one year for Darrell Ehlers. And when I was picking berries, a couple of the farmers around said, we need somebody to drive tractor. I was 9 years old. And I made just exactly twice as much money driving tractor as I made picking berries. And I told my mother at that point, I will never pick another strawberry. And other than my own use, I have not.
And today, 9-year-olds don't drive tractors.
Now, 9-year-olds don't drive tractors, especially not for pay,
I remember haying with a 5-year-old driving a tractor.
My family, I guess I'm an old-fashioned parent because my son just turned 39 here a few days ago. And when he was 6 years old, he was driving our tractors and my pickup to pick up hay. When he was 14, I told him that he was in charge of crew to hire and fire, and he did a fine job. I have nothing but respect for my son for the way he turned out to be a worker, and I think my daughters did okay too, didn't they, Rod?
There were a lot of potatoes growing up in your
A
country.
lot of potatoes, Nordlands. Nordland brothers. Nordlands were there.
Carlsons were there.
Carlsons were there. They were a little bit
Lorraines.
further north. The Lorraines.
They like that sandy soil.
Yeah, they like the sandy soil. We had there's a lot of that in there because it's, a lot of gravel in there. And
There's still some, mostly seed potatoes now, but
mostly seed. Very little, most everything now seems to be grown, most of the potatoes seem to be grown, and I say most, not all, but most seem to be grown the other side of the Guide Meridian. There are still a few potato, there's some up around the Deming area. There's a couple of patches up in there, and there's a few around my property, around my place yet, but mostly, Bedlington and everything are invested really heavily on the other side of the Guide Meridian.
yeah.
And of course, that's not the same either. There's no potato forks, and there's no no potato sacks.
You don't drag potato sacks around
You
anymore.
don't drag potato sacks. You don't.
Did you drag potato sacks around?
I never for the farm. Actually, let me back up. The only time we drug potato sacks around is when we were gleaning. We would get permission from the farmer to glean. And my family kept themselves in potatoes for a year by gleaning potato farms. And it's funny to me because I see now these sacks of potatoes in the store that are all they're all crooked looking, and they were culls. Even we didn't pick those up. I mean, and we fed pigs with them too. I mean, we could pick up different fields. We could pick up 400 to 500 pounds of potatoes that they would actually throw off the picker, and we could.
And they often didn't dig the side rows, the edge rows.
A lot of them didn't dig. Yeah, and we would we'd boil them up with milk, and we would raise pigs off those potatoes.
Yeah.
And of course, we kept the very best ones for ourselves, and our family ate for a couple, 3 years on just gleaned potatoes. I mean, that we would each year go and pick a winter's supply. And
Now they plow them in right away. So
Yeah.
you don't get a chance to glean much anymore.
no, there is not. There's very little gleaning in Whatcom County anymore. Even they used to actually open strawberry fields up many years ago.
Yeah.
And they don't do that. They cut them as soon as they're done picking them. They cut the tops and get them ready for winter. And,
Yeah, the little kids don't have a chance to work anymore, like we did. Maybe that's good, huh?
like I said, my kids all started working when they were 6 years old, and I think some of them have stopped now.
Tell us a little bit about the Pangborn Cemetery.
Pangborn Cemetery, here again. Now Rod is in charge of the Pangborn Cemetery. My father was in charge, and Rod is in charge of putting flags up for the Memorial Day. Pangborn Cemetery sits right at the foot of the outflow of the Pangborn Lake. It is an extremely, how do I want to say? It's a great little cemetery.
Mm-hmm.
It is not the neatest. But it has some of the oldest graves in Whatcom County are in there. There are Civil War veterans. And for a small cemetery, there are a lot of veterans buried there. The American Legion every year does a good. I think they have a really good program to honor the fallen.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that we found graves that were unlocated before. Rod, you found a couple that were unlocated too, didn't you?
There was many that were marked,
Yeah.
so we marked quite a few of them, like 80 of them.
Oh, that's even more than, yeah. I mean, we found like 3 or 4, but
After he thought he had them all marked, a family came and said there were 6 more that weren't marked.
yeah.
The stories I've heard is that the old days they weren't marked, the grave boundaries weren't marked as well, and if they had snow on the ground, you didn't know where the markers were anyhow. And sometimes the snow was pretty heavy, and well, our ground didn't freeze, so we could still dig graves in the winter. They miscalculated where they were digging.
And I'm sure that's true of every cemetery in Whatcom County.
Yeah, we found the one in NookChat that's right at in the bird graveyard, in the bird compound. We have 16 grave sites together, and there's Tom Jones found a marker at the corner in 1884. We have no clue who that person ever was or ever is. I have not found out anything about that person yet, and why they're buried there, because my grandfather opened that cemetery in '86, which was 2 years later. So evidently he didn't know about it, or if he did, anyhow.
Yeah, it's kind of funny, especially, this is off. Never mind, I'm going to skip that because that's off topic completely.
Yeah.
But yeah, my family moved here, like I said, in 1919. My first uncle was born in 1916. My other uncle was born in 1917, and he lived on the Garrison Road, right on the corner of the Garrison and Haverstick for a while. He milked 25 cows by hand twice a day. And and he actually was a polio survivor. In his later years, he moved on to Ellen Boss Feed and was the kind of plant foreman in Ellen Boss Feed for many years. And that was Ike Bronkema, or Carl. I mean, Carl Bronkema was his real name, but Ike was his family name. And we had more family names. I mean, more family names than we had real names. Well, we had, Ike and Fats and Beeb and Punk and, I mean, so, but, and I guess one of the things I did want to add was the reason that we actually ended up in Whatcom County was when my grandparents first came here. They did not come to Whatcom County. They went out to Whidbey Island, and very shortly after they moved there, of course, all your groceries had to be brought in off of the mainland. And Deception Pass Bridge and was not there or anything, and there was no power boats to speak of. And my grandmother hired a boat to take her across to the mainland so she could go grocery shopping. And what should have been like a 20-minute crossing took almost 3 hours. And they were just about swept out to sea. And the family history is that less than 2 weeks later, my grandparents were on the mainland. That's as far as they were going to go. And that's, here a little bit off topic, but that's part of who the family is.
Those of you who don't know why the Pull and Be Damned Road is named such, the mail boat that used to anchor there and take the mail into La Conner, if the tide was changing and going out through the pass, they could pull and be damned. They weren't going to get into the La Conner to get the mail there. So they named it the Pull and Be Damned and the road, and it's still there, on the Swinomish Reservation. I always wondered why it was called that, and then somebody told me the story that the mail people are the ones that named it that, because they used to go ashore with hand-powered oars, and when that tide changes, you can't even do it with a powerboat sometimes. A lot of power goes through that pass, and the people who live on the island, it's an island. And before the bridge was built. Because that's a tough call to get over La Conner if you don't know the tides. And the boats used to go up be in the inland side of Whidbey and then up the Swinomish Slough rather than going out around the point because they didn't want to face that tide change.
It's, even going over to Anacortes and going through that, the tide rip in through there is.
And Phoebe Judson did the same thing. She left Whidbey Island to come up and found Linden, so it was not uncommon to leave the island for
It was not.
civilization, as we knew it then.
Yeah.
Did any of you ever tell you about the big burn in '85?
No, I had never heard it before.
I got to write about that someday. So it's in some of the old books, but yeah, everything around Linden burned. The only way they saved their furniture was to dig a hole and bury it. The houses went to the ground. Well, good thing about it, there were no more stump piles.
No more stump piles.
Stump piles all went away too.
Now there's a book here in this library. And in fact, Dale and I were just talking about it a week ago or so, and it's called Boundary Town.
Yeah.
And if you're interested in the history of Sumas, that's got a really good synopsis of what Sumas was. Some of the first auto cars and you know, the outlaws and the you know, the thriving community that Sumas was compared to what it is today.
Well, it was a junction of three railroads. Most people don't realize that the railroad coming up the east side, the Seattle East Shore and Lake Shore and Eastern, came up through NookChat, and the other one came in from Whatcom, and then the Canadians came down and tied in. So that was a big, big port. That was bigger than Vancouver and bigger than New Westminster at the time. So, but like all other things, they found other places to go move their material, and Sumas died away.
Well, that was, you know, I mean, that was part of the reason that, too, is why they had so many shingle weavers here. Because they had the railroads that were accessible, and they could send it to anywhere. They could send it north, they could send it south. When the easy timber quit being readily available, that's when the shingle mill started to die.
Yeah.
When the easy timber was gone. Because at that point, they could move to where the timber was that was easier to get at again.
If you look at the old pictures, you're going to find out a lot of the cedars were dead from forest fires that topped them, and then they just died, and they were standing there 150 feet tall with a lot of shingles in them.
When I was out of work for a very short period of time, and part of what I did was what they called being a Cedar Wrap. And I would go up in the hills, more in Skagit County than here, of course, but we were Cedar Rats on the Scott Paper Company property, and we would get the old cedar stumps they were all hollow, and they all had the sawboards cut into them, and we would start cutting them, and then we'd cut them into shake bolts. And they would, because we were so far out, because this, you know, that had been, you know, 1890s and 1880s, and so there was no roads up in there where we were going. They would actually fly all the shingle bolts out with a helicopter and sling cords, and we hauled out a lot of shake bolts that way. And so
Yeah, cedar doesn't deteriorate very well.
not the old growth. The second growth is not near as good as the old growth was. I still have fence posts that are old growth cedar.
Yeah. I still have stumps with the cedar with the notches in them.
Yeah.
They're all charred though, because they've all been burned over, and once they're charred, they don't deteriorate again. They're insulated. We don't hear much about shake bolts anymore.
In fact, I think you know, it was funny because the number one buyer of shake bolts for a long time there was California, and then they actually said, California, the whole state of California said, no, we can't do this anymore. We cannot bring shake bolts in because the roofs are not fireproof enough. Which I could never figure that out because here they've got a tar-based fiber shingle, and that's okay, but no, we can't use shakes. So then they came up with a fire retardant that they could dip all the shakes in, and that became a okay to send back to California then. Just, you know,
Then they
stupid,
made concrete shakes.
yeah, stupid knowledge.
Got
that I have.
concrete shakes they put on now.
Well, just like, you know, I mean, most of your best homes actually have concrete planks on the sides. Never deteriorate, never have to be painted, never anything.
So we went through a great change there in the late 1800s, and the farms didn't really take off until turn of the century when we got rid of the trees. So, and most of us remember stump farms when we didn't have the, and everybody had a keg of dynamite or two, a box of dynamite and blue stumps.
You would be amazed at some of the stuff we found, and I don't remember. I have to go back, and I don't remember whether that was Bill and Hank's brother that my parents bought the house from, or their father. I know that when we moved, the first time we went into the house, it actually looked like the gentleman had just stepped out. His shoes were by his chair, his glasses were on the, and his family Bible was on a small stand, right by his chair. I know that we returned the family Bible, and I don't know what happened to the rest of it. I was 9 years old, or 8 years old, but I do know that the Bible was returned. But I don't remember whether it was. Did you know which brother that, or was that a brother or up there where my folks lived?
I don't know. No. That wasn't the main homestead.
No, that
was
wasn't.
over, you were away from that.
Yeah, we weren't the main homestead. No, no. But we were the one of the older homes there.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, all the old. It had the asbestos siding and you know, the rippled asbestos siding. And fun, you know, it's funny because there's actually a 14-acre game reserve right next to where my parents were. And it's funny, it's 14 acres, but 1 acre of that was owned by, I want to say, the Maddens.
I don't know anything about that.
I think it was actually owned by the Maddens. 1 acre sitting right on the corner, which is, you know, what, 100 by 100 or
Yeah.
you know, a little bit over that, but I mean, that's sort of
105 by 105
yeah, okay.
is an acre.
And it had a small cabin on it
Mm-hmm.
that we used to. It was all locked up, and I was actually a pretty honest kid at the time, so I was never actually in it. Well, things have changed over the years, but come on, I'm an auctioneer and I sell real estate.
Well, there were a lot of little 1 acre pieces donated for various uses by the homesteaders. Schools was
Schools was a biggie, yeah.
and they were pretty plentiful. And sometimes water districts or something, they'd donate a little piece of land.
I guess one of the questions I have, and I don't know the answer to, and I will ask you. When the railroads came into this area, were they deeded every other acre?
They what?
Were they deeded every other acre on
No,
each
they-
side of the tracks?
No. They were deeded a working right-of-way,
Okay.
150 feet wide, to establish the tracks on. Then they were supposed to pull it back to, I think, 60 or 80 feet. And but they were given rights of way. The ones through Seattle and Eastern, the Bergs gave the right-of-way, and we only gave a 60-foot right-of-way to the railroad, and that's still the railroad. But the homesteaders all gave it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
They didn't buy it, they gave it to them.
Well, see, I know in
So-
a lot of places, like in eastern Washington and places like that.
They just moved ahead of the railroad,
Well, what they actually.
signing them up.
Yeah, what they actually did back in eastern Washington is they deeded to the railroad, as they opened up virgin territory, they deeded them one section, every other section along the right of way on both sides of the road, or both sides of the rail bed. And if you had a section here and then a section here, on the other side of the right of way would be a section in the middle. But they could not be contiguous. They were all separated.
No, that wasn't the way they did it here. They took actual right-of-way
Yeah, I was, yeah.
as they went. And it was all donated.
Uh-huh.
Because we had no access to the outside world, and these people were going to provide access to the world. When the roads came along, we donated the land for the roads, too. But it always was for the reason that if the railroad ever ceased to exist, then it goes back to the
Right.
original owners. And the British Columbia and Bellingham Bay did cease to exist, and so that land was all sold. The original homesteaders got the money. I know in Everson we got the money from the Kale homestead because they wanted to build a bridge on the railroad right-of-way. And so they built the bridge on the railroad right-of-way, and the highway department came and bought the land from the heirs. So
Is that right, for the BB and B and C?
the British Columbia and Bellingham Bay to British Columbia right-of-way was deeded. I mean, we gave them the right-of-way with the idea that if they abandoned the right-of-way, it went back to the owners. Well, by that time, they wanted to put the new bridge on the old railroad right-of-way, which is where it is, and so they had to buy the land from the heirs.
I think through the Clearbrook area, they bought it for $1. They bought the right of way for $1.
Yeah. Well, they didn't buy this. It was all donated.
I know through our property they did. And then the right of way is 50 feet from the center of the railroad line each way.
I think ours is only 30 or 40. I can't remember now. I know the county and I have a disagreement because we deeded them 20 feet, but they think they got 30 feet. So we've had a little disagreement on that. They cut down my trees on my land because they thought they were in the county right away.
We had that dispute, not with the county, but.
We had some discussions. But the bureaucracy is always right, of course.
It never ceases to amaze me, some of the.
Tell us a little bit about Clearbrook. What do you know about Clearbrook?
Clearbrook. Well, I'm gonna refer to Rod a lot on that too, because he's an old timer compared to me.
You're the storyteller. Well, you got to pull things out of, you can spin the yarn.
Do you remember exactly when the general store went out at Clearbrook? It seems like I remember it, but maybe I don't.
Clearbrook really existed because of the logging. They had these little tramways in the area, and they were narrow gauge railroads to do the logging. And there were about 3 in the Clearbrook area. And when the logging ceased, and that was about 1915, and that was pretty much the end of Clearbrook. And then the post office, Clearbrook had a post office, Van Buren had a post office, and that all moved to Everson in 1918. So it was pretty much driven by how much timber they got out.
But the grade school was there till 42, wasn't it?
Not really. The grade school was where the railroad tracks, on this side of the railroad tracks.
Yeah.
That was in 1884 to 1910. And then the Clearbrook School, and that was
The one on the
that
bend.
was 12 grades. And then in about 1918, it became only 8 grades.
Right.
And then where it was, the 1910 school site, went to 19 I think 44, when they consolidated the different school districts.
I think it's 42, but that's,
I
I
think
won't-
they went a little longer there.
Oh, did
because
they?
The kids were a little slower.
well, that's.
We were from NookChat.
You were corrected in 18 because they became the Victory School District with NookChat. And when I was on the school board didn't know that we'd ever been a Victory School District. And I said, yes, we joined with Clearbrook for from 18 to 30. And we called it just Victory School District. But yet the diplomas were to the Clearbrook School and to the NookChat School, not the Victory. My mother was in that period, and she graduated, and she had a big diploma from NookChat School, even though she was in the Victory School District. So it's a little sidebar that we had.
What school was it that's right by my house there?
To the north of you?
Yeah, just to the north.
That
of
was the 1910 Clearbrook.
Okay, that one was-
District 13.
The one that you had the swimming pool in.
And the one that's the swimming hole, yeah.
Did you have a swimming hole in the base?
When did the grocery store close?
Well, that's what I'm trying to. It's
Johnny Timber had that.
Oh, at Clearbrook.
at Clearbrook,
Oh,
yeah,
that went on for years.
yeah. Didn't that close in like 70?
Louis Post.
Yeah. No, Post was a Van Buren, wasn't it? The Van Buren,
Oh, it was Uncle Oscar, all I know.
Oscar Swanson?
Oscar
Did your
Post.
parents know you were swimming in that hole?
Where was this hole at? I don't
Just
know.
north-
Oh, the pond. Oh, that was a community pond.
Oh.
They built a,
Wasn't that a school there?
no.
Oh, okay, I'm
No,
sorry.
the
Then I
school
was
to-
misinformed.
To the north of that. That was Russell's. They built a community pond. It was good, and they asked for donations, like $10 or something. They dug this pond out. It's still there today. Well, there was only one problem. It was cold.
That wasn't the only problem, but yes, it was cold.
Well, we'd go up there swimming on the hottest day of the year, and the first 6 inches to a foot was warm, but the rest had these springs in there, and it was really cold. You didn't stay there long.
Well, that's, I mean, we started out, I keep thinking of some of the things that I did and how stupid we were, as kids.
We were adventurous.
Adventurous, okay, we'll use that word. Just death wish is the one I keep thinking. I mean,
You never got involved in putting buckboards or wagons on top of barns or anything like that, did you?
no, but I did move a few outhouses, believe it or not.
Around Halloween time?
Chevrolet.
May I ask, where was this swimming hole?
It is, do you know where the tracks cross the Van Buren Road?
Yes, our son, I'm sorry, my name's Kathy Marks, my husband Terry. Our son Jeff and his wife Shireen just bought the place on Van Buren Road where the railroad tracks cross the road from Mel and Troy or something.
Okay, yep.
Melissa.
Yeah, that was,
Melissa, okay,
that
my
was the,
son-
yeah, that was the Kale, that was originally, that was a Kale property.
You were just south of the.
So
track.
Jeff and his wife are just south of the tracks.
Right,
On the-
okay,
on
I'm
the
just
east
north,
side.
yeah. See, I'm just north on the west side.
Okay, well, Jim Berg, wonderful Jim Berg is our Bible study leader where I work. So he said, you have to come and hear about Clearbrook. So where was the pond?
It's still there.
The pond
It
is.
is
to
still
the
there.
east
It's on
of
the west
Jeff's
side, isn't it?
place?
It is, it will, no, it would be to the north of your son's place, on the other side of the road.
On the other side of the
Yeah.
road. Oh,
If you know, if you go just past my property,
okay,
the next driveway past my property is the driveway to go into Aggregates West
yes.
Pit. Okay, right there at the corner of Aggregates West Pit, or of their driveway, is the swimming hole. And trust me, it was as a young 9-year-old, 10-year-old kid. The cold water, it bothered us, but not as bad as it would now. I mean, now we'd probably have a heart attack and die of shock. But I actually saw my first salamander I'd ever seen in that pond or in that swimming hole.
Wow. thank you.
Do you remember anybody calling that Barnes Prairie up there?
Not there, but getting back to you,
Yes.
where your son lives is the 1884 site of the Clearbrook School.
That's what we're thinking.
And it's a 5-acre piece,
Yes.
and if you look at the property, it's a 20-acre, but in the back, there's a little piece, L piece there.
Yes.
And that was donated in 1884. It was and then here's a picture.
Oh, my goodness gracious.
That's the picture of what was sacked at your place, or that place.
Isn't that the?
See, when Doug and Georgia moved onto that property, the Kales lived in that small little house. And Bob and May Kirkman lived in that,
I've
lived
seen
in,
that name when you research back the address. I've seen.
and, but the Kales were in there at that time. And,
Garen lived there.
Did he?
Chuck Garen, teacher at NookChat.
see, that must've been when I was
Was
gone.
C.S.'s family?
The Kale,
What? Were
I
they,
don't know, it was one of the Kale,
Earl Kale, that's all I know.
was it Earl?
I think it was
Yeah.
Earl. Yeah.
Earl's a
and,
cousin of mine.
and that was one of the first that I remember back in there, I mean, when I was growing up.
I didn't know Earl lived there. I thought he lived up on the Sumas Mountain.
Because Bob and May lived there as long as I can ever remember. Kirkmans, they lived the property, the yellow house just south, and then their son bought that property and built that house up, or actually he only made an addition on it. We laughed because you have to see what the original house was like. I mean, it was tiny.
That my son lives at,
Yeah.
that house. Well, you can see where the doorways, these folks probably don't wanna hear about that, but you can see where there's like an old doorway and,
See, my house, if you look at the records, my house was built in 1880. And my house started out as a very small house. I'm gonna say, but like a 2-bedroom, no bath home. And Mr. Hinton, Warren Hinton, told me that somewhere in the 30s or 40s, they decided it would be a good idea to just attach a chicken coop to the side of my house. So they took moved the chicken coop, and they mated it to the house. They went, wow, there's enough room here, let's put on a second story. So I have to tell you, folks, that my house is the worst hodgepodge of pieces of lumber I've ever seen in my life.
You're saying it doesn't meet code?
It probably did back then.
There was no code back then.
Well, there you go. I'd say it met code then. Today, I don't know if I could sell it. I mean, and you have to,
Yeah, you can grandfather then.
yeah, but you have to remember too, is that if my house ever burnt down, it could never be rebuilt,
That's true.
because I'm within 25 feet of the creek.
Oh.
It could never be rebuilt,
Not on that site.
not on that site.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of things have changed.
My barn is within, what, 50 feet of the creek?
How far away from the gas lines do you have to be?
Well, I don't know. According to Williams Pipeline, they were gonna come in and go within 12 feet of my bedroom window.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, that's what we said. Why do you think they're talking to you? Because we said no. It's not going there. Yeah, they want to take out my power vault. They want to take out that dormitory building and run the line right through there. Take out my well as a part of their easement. I live in what they call the federal power corridor. They actually talked about putting towers up. When they were talking about adding another cogen plant in Sumas, one of the things that they used to scare us was that they said that they would be putting up high power transmission lines.
Gotta move that stuff somewhere.
Yeah.
so, Mr. Bronkema, so you are on the other side,
I was looking for my dad. Sorry.
so you are Jeff's place, the tracks, the woods, and then you are?
No. I'm your son's place, the tracks, where the tracks cross is basically the corner of my property,
Okay,
and my driveway is before that little patch of woods.
oh, okay.
My house is almost unseeable from the road.
You're on the west side of the road?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, okay, thank you. Oh,
Yeah, and you
but
can't.
You have the horses?
No, that's Troy and Melanie.
Oh, is that?
I have the goats.
Goats.
Goats, huh?
Let's not go there.
But maybe we can see your
Maybe that's
silo.
the story we
Sure.
want
You
to
can
tell.
you can see my silo.
Yes, okay, thank
You
you.
can, yeah, that's all you can see is, in fact, if I ever get off my dead keister again, Christmas time, we used to put a very large cross up and had it lit all winter long on top of the silo. And it was kind of fun because it was the only thing that you could see up there was the top of the silo, in dark, because my house lights are not there or anything else.
Yeah.
Tell us what the store was like.
The store in Clearbrook was basically, it was a general store. It was a little bit of everything in there. And I don't remember it that well. It was not a place that we were populated a lot, but I can remember going down there. Now it must have been out prior to '68, or we would have rode there. My dad and I took horses the winter of '68, '69. We actually got on our horse and we rode down to the corner of the trap line and Badger, where a friend of ours lived.
Mm-hmm.
And those of you that remember that year was a pretty bad snowstorm. And but we rode down there and went to the Van Buren store because our friend had a truck, and the Badger was clear, and we could get to the Van Buren store. And then we got back to his place, put everything in the saddlebags, and rode back to the house.
The Van Buren wasn't open.
The Van Buren was not open. The Badger or the trap line was not open. There were cut banks, and there was just no way of getting in there. The Pangborn.
Would you explain what happens in a cut bank
Well, that's
when
what.
it snows? There are people who don't even know what a cut bank is.
Oh, come on! You don't know what a cut bank is. When they built the road, they didn't want roads to go like this all the time. They wanted them to go like this. So when they would push a road through, if there was a little mound, they would just cut it. And they would push it off to the side, and they would cut through. It was just a cut, and it was a cut bank. And when you get snow, of course, and the northeasters that we get up here through the Fraser Valley, anywhere where there's a cut bank or any place that blocks the wind, you get a snowdrift. And some of these cut banks years ago, well, like where Dahl built their house, and now it's Vanderveen's, John Vanderveen's house there. There was about a 15-foot cut bank there. And there was absolutely no way. You could walk over it. It was harder than cement, but you couldn't ride over it with a horse, and you certainly couldn't drive through it. I remember in '68, that was when the county bought their first rotary snowplows as an emergency purchase, because they had no way to open roads. Most of the county trucks and the state trucks were 1.5 ton trucks with flat. I mean, they were flat plows. They were not V plows or anything. And
Flat plows and angled blade.
angled blade, yes, that's what I should have said. And I'll tell you honestly, even today, a lot of times, if it's not for LTI, and that's not a plug for LTI or anything, but if it wasn't for LTI, you wouldn't get around this county, because they have some big V blades that will make an 8-foot swath.
And why does LDI have them?
because they have all the milk trucks and there's a lot of farmers left in this county.
They have to get out to get the milk. Don't worry about those people who need to get to the store. They
No,
need to get
that's-
to the
that's
farm to
actually-
get the milk.
That's actually how it is too.
But they'd only go to the farm and then come back. So if you lived a door down the road beyond the farm, you didn't get your road plowed. They
So
only plowed to
LTI has-
the farm that was needed the milk got.
Excuse me, Jim.
But they did. I know in the 50s, they were the ones that kept the roads open because the roads closed about 30 minutes after they'd open them up.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
So they'd have to open them up to go pick up the milk and open them up on the way back, and then the road was closed until the next time they went through.
I can't remember what year it was. It must have been somewhere around 92 or 93. We had a late snowstorm. And basically it shut down the county. And even where I lived, I ended up spending like 4 days in Dairygold just trying to find a couch or whatever, the floor to sleep on. We'd get several thicknesses of cardboard box and lay on the floor as insulation because the plant was, of course, all cement floors. And I always, wintertime, I always carried a sleeping bag and a blanket and a little extra food, and I'd throw it in the back of the rig and back of my truck, and it would stay there all winter. But I can remember watching. I was actually working. I wasn't working for LTI, but I had nothing to do. We were working 12-hour shifts, and I said, "Gee, there's no place to go. I can open a can of soup and eat that here because I can't even walk to a grocery or anything. It's too far because there are no groceries in Linden anymore. The restaurants couldn't open, and so I said, okay, I'll talk to LTI and see if they need somebody to help. And they said we could use a transfer driver from Sumas to Linden. I said, okay. And I could look down the Van Buren Road to Rod's house. And that was as far as I could see because everything else was covered. And I thought, it wouldn't be that bad for me to just walk out from here. But literally, when I went through there, the mirrors on the trucks were cutting into the snowdrifts right there on the corner of the Van Buren and Badger. And that's the only reason that we could get through there is that the LTI trucks said just tell the county and state to stay the heck out of our way, and away they went. And that was the only reason why we could get to Sumas, is because they would plow that road almost hourly to keep it open. And
People who don't live in wind country don't understand drifting snow.
I can tell you that when you're facing into a northeaster, riding horse, you can freeze your fingers. Trust me.
Yeah, the wind goes right through you.
You can't wear enough clothing. You can't wear enough gloves. Your hands, of course, are. And honestly, that's not true either. With mittens, I probably would have been all right, but with gloves, no, they didn't work very well. But yeah, that was. And to this day, I mean, even last year, right there where I talk about on the Ehlers property and McMurray, there's a couple of cut banks in there, and when the wind blows, even if it's only a 4-foot drift, so what? You still can't get through it. I was blessed this year by a guy who came up and actually came up with a tractor. I was taking groceries to a cousin who still lives on the Pangborn Road, and it didn't look that horrible, so I decided I would try it. It was the biggest mistake of my life, and I actually would have been all right, but the two people ahead of me didn't make it, and so I was still moving pretty good, but I had to stop, and that was the end of that. as we're figuring out how to get us all turned around and pull everybody out, a dairy farmer and a tractor came by and opened up the road for us. And here again, the Pangborn Road also has a lot of cut bank. There where Helge Johnson's property was, there's the tree line is up pretty high, and there's a cut bank there. And even though it's facing the wrong way, it still managed to get 4, 5, and 6 foot drifts in there this last winter. But the winters, you know, and I don't know if, honestly, the winter of 68, 69 was all that much worse than this one was. But you have to remember, you have to look back and say, what have we done with equipment since then? I know LTI has bigger and more powerful plows. The county has newer rotaries out. So I'm not going to say that winter was I know I was out of school for over 2 weeks. You were probably in school then too, weren't you, Rod?
Mhm.
And we were out for a couple of weeks.
The big difference in 68 and this last winter was the temperature. It was like -4, hit -4, one of the lowest temperatures in Washington that we've had. Well, we had a warm northeaster last year.
Didn't feel all that warm to me, believe
Well,
me.
it was a warm northeaster.
You gotta remember, he's the weatherman.
Yeah, I know.
He knows everything. Do you measure snow too?
Oh, yeah. The depth this last year was probably, it was like 22 inches at one time, so that was unusual. Usually you only have 6 inches, but like Terry said.
But we're having less snow now than we used to have, aren't we? In the 50s?
Let's talk about that after this winter.
Is
Well,
that,
Then we'll find out.
You're predicting something, are you?
I'm not saying anymore.
I guess I better go hunker down for get my wood in, because if Mr. Perry says it's going to be a cold winter, he ought to know they've been keeping records since what,
1903.
1903? So he keeps it for the Weather Bureau, so he knows what's going on. So.
yeah, he has aged well.
Tell me what the Clearbrook store was like.
Okay, here again, and it was pretty much, it was a little general store, and I
Well,
don't.
but a lot of people don't know, have a clue.
Well, it
about
had a
general
little.
store.
It had a little bit of everything.
But it was a pot-bellied stove, you know. Did they have nice heaters and places for people to sit and?
And I have to say, I can't remember, and I don't think they did, if I remember right.
The only thing I remember is Lynn Carlson talking about the pickle barrel. Apparently they had a pickle barrel that you could get pickles out of. And you had to step up. It was.
Yeah, it was.
You had to step up, it was up a ways from the road. And part of that store is still there.
Yeah.
There's a building that's been converted to a living space.
Yeah.
Part of the walls, probably one wall, is still
Yeah.
part of that.
But you like you said, you did have to step up. And see, when the general store went out, and then that must have been about before 1970, because I think in 1970 we bought all our fertilizer from Wolfkill. At that time, they were a fertilizer distributor there, and then it went to a weld shop. It went to in back of they put in a big silo. Wasn't that?
Was it Clearbrook Farms or something?
Yeah, Clearbrook Farms. Clearbrook Farms. They put this great big silo in there, and I think they went belly up just shortly after that.
The pea silage didn't really work out.
Yeah, it didn't work. Okay.
It didn't ferment right, and it really wasn't a good.
And then they ended up grinding gypsum board or sheetrock into that silo, and they hauled tons of sheetrock in there and hauled a few less tons out, because I think there might still be some in there. Now, here again, it was not a real well thought up plant, but they had a huge tub grinder in there. But the store was, it was all wooden floored, of course.
Yeah.
And I remember the store there, but I don't remember that much about it.
It wasn't a self-serve, was it? They
I think when I was in there, it actually was. You
Oh.
didn't give your list out or anything, but no, you went in and you picked up your items, and then you
they have it on display so you can pick it up.
Yeah,
Okay?
wooden counter, and of course I don't remember pickle barrel or anything like that. I don't go back quite that far. I'm sorry. Actually I'm not, but
I don't like pickles anyhow. They were dill pickles too. They weren't sweet.
I don't know if there was much dill in them. I think they were just brined pickles.
You'd probably take a cup and have a little brine too if you wanted it.
I imagine. See, it's funny, and here I'll get off subject just a little bit, but I used to haul out of the Nally Valley for a dairy farmer. I hauled, basically it was cannery waste. But down there in the Nally Valley, that's where they made Nally's pickles. And there are thousands, at that time when I hauled in there, I think they've sold it since then, and I don't know if it's still there, but there were thousands of about 1,000-gallon wood casks on stands. And that was the brine for all their pickles.
Oh.
And they made all the Nally's pickles were made there in that plant.
It was Enumclaw, wasn't it?
No, actually it was
That's by
it was
Tacoma.
out by it's just out of Tacoma on the road to Gig Harbor, the Nally Valley. That was a really
I
strange.
don't remember very many cucumber farms anymore.
I don't think there
When I
are.
was a kid, kids picked cucumbers.
There were there. Yes, I can remember.
But I don't remember any, I don't see them anymore.
I think the
Well,
Nally's, I think Nally's has a place around Mount Vernon.
Do they?
Ah.
I don't know that, but
They grow them down there.
I know that years ago, before the tulips got to be such a big thing, that I can remember big fields of cucumbers, driving by these big fields myself, and they would have 10,000 people out there picking into these big wooden crates
Yeah.
of cucumbers. And I can remember some of them around here, but just not where I can't remember where they were or as.
They may have been before your time, because there were a lot of them in the 50s. So, local farmers, dairy farmers that put in 3 or 4 acres of cucumbers or strawberries or whatever they thought might make up your little extra money.
Yeah, there was a lot of dairy farms that had, they'd have a small patch of something else to make it worth their.
My sister raised a 1/4 acre of beans to pay for her college. A 1/4 acre of beans paid for 1 year of college.
The
But
glass.
she wouldn't let us pick unless she was overwhelmed, because that cost money to pay
cost money.
hire out.
Well, the Glass boys raised about 1.5 acres of corn, and that was their college money.
Yeah? They roadside stand?
They had a roadside stand,
Yeah.
and they sold cheap. I mean, they were some of the cheapest in the county. Usually 10 for $1, and it got up to 13 for $1 a lot of times. And they made enough money to.
Now that's 3 for $1.
Yeah, if you're lucky. Yeah.
And it probably came from Yakima. In a big truck.
Well, I'll tell you what. I bought a bunch of corn out of Yakima one time when my son got married, and I said, "Where are you getting your corn?" And she said, "Oh, we're getting it south of Yakima." And I said, "Yes." I said, "How far south?" She goes, "Well, south of Oregon." It was California corn coming up, but it was south. They were getting it from south of Yakima. So, but there has been wolf kill was a going concern in there. All the area farmers bought all their fertilizer and everything out of that Clearbrook store. And I can definitely remember, like Rod says, is that you went up 4 or 5 steps, and it was almost like a wooden boardwalk up there. and that was the office. And then that warehouse was actually on a lower level. And we'd load up, I don't know how many trips we took that we'd load up a 1957 Chev pickup full of bags of fertilizer. And then they would actually let us have the spreader, and we'd pull that home. And
They loaned it to you?
yeah, they'd loan it to us because we were buying all their fertilizer. You know, we'd go out to the back and hook up to the little 8N and
Put it on the back of the pickup and haul it home?
it towed it. Yeah, we'd tow
Yeah,
it behind the
tow it.
pickup with a load of fertilizer on there, and I'd start.
Fertilizer was in the spreader.
No, it was in the pickup.
But you dragged the spreader.
Yeah, but then I don't know, they were 6-foot spreaders or something like that. I mean, not like they were like what you see now. And then of course, then I'd hook up the 8N, and it was all ground driven. And my dad would set how much he wanted, and then he'd go get another load of fertilizer and drop that off, and I'd go start dumping bags into it and start emptying it out. Things are a lot different now, and most of the you don't do any of your own anymore, do you, Rod? Any of your fertilizing or
Yeah, you can rent a trailer, you can get about
Yeah.
4 or 5 ton in a
But-
trailer,
but
100 acres,
yeah, with the ground, they're ground driven too, yeah.
yeah.
But I mean, they just don't do. I mean, when I was growing up, when Rod was growing up around here, every farmer made hay.
Yeah.
If you had a farm, you made hay. I was a top buck at 13, and that's how I made my living till I was almost 18. Was working in the hay fields. I made my living since I was 9 years old doing that, but I couldn't make that much money driving tractor. But as you got bigger and stronger, and a lot of times you'd work for 4 farmers in a year, and you do first cutting, and then they go. I mean, a lot of times farmers would pool and buy equipment together.
No loose hay.
No loose hay at that time, except for ourselves. We put up loose hay, my dad and I. Didn't want to pay. My dad didn't want to pay for baling, so we put up loose hay, which is a trick in and of itself.
When I had trouble with a little pain in my right knee, the chiropractor says, "What did you do that would cause that knee to be?" And I said, "Well, I never did anything. And he says, "Well, if you ever do anything when you were young?" And I said, "No, I didn't." And then I remembered I used to use that knee to boost those bales up into the top of the buck load. Yes, he said that would do it.
Yeah.
So we as kids, we do things, and then our bodies tell us things later on, and we don't remember what we did to cause that body to do that.
Well, I got to tell you a little secret. I rodeoed for almost 16 years. I rode bulls and bucking horses.
Ah.
I don't get out of bed in a piece anymore. I get out in pieces.
Are you trying to say you weren't a successful bull rider?
Actually, I was quite a successful bull rider, but it doesn't matter. You're still going to hit the ground.
You don't get off,
No, it's not like getting off on a. And I'll tell you what, you see these guys. If you watch rodeo at all, and of course that's my sport, but if you watch rodeo at all, you'll see the gentleman jump off and grab a hold of the pickup rider. And you think everything's cool, but I'll tell you what, I've been beat up so bad just trying to get off the bucking horse onto the pickup rider that sometimes the ground would have felt better. No, I mean it was a great life, and something I was involved in when I started. I was 12 years old when I started getting involved. And
Anybody else have any questions?
yes, sir.
Question.
What do you know about Boundary Lake by the Hazelnut Farm?
Out there by Holmquist. I worked in that hazelnuts for a while. It's right up against the Canadian border. In fact, when I worked there, Gerald's dad was still alive. He lived in a little house back behind Gerald's house, and Gerald, of course, Holmquist could not own Boundary Lake. But he could own, where the road went through, he owned that the rest of it that was on that side was his. And some friends of ours, Bob Johnson, Jack Patience, and I owned a blind that we kept on that side of the lake. And then when we decided it was time to go duck hunting, we would pull it up over the road and then take the boat, my dad's boat, and we'd move it out there and we'd anchor that duck blind out. And we would sit in the middle of the lake and, oh, did we shoot ducks?
So who actually owns the lake? And I noticed there's a Canadian that used to have a seaplane on the lake too, back in the 70s.
According to state law, you cannot own a lake anymore. It has to have public access. It has to, you can own the land to the high water mark around the lake. Which the Williams and everybody else, I mean, Williams had several places where they drew irrigation water out. Did you ever fish that lake?
Yeah, bullheads.
Bullhead, have you been in there lately at all?
Nope.
There's been, somebody introduced bass into that lake. We've caught some really nice bass right off of the Homequest Road there. But that's, here again, that's another one of those that's, although I was around it all my life, actually ended up swimming in there without wanting to in the middle of November. Those little 16 gauge single shots can really kick when you're standing up. And
You learn.
you learn. If you're gonna be in a tippy boat, don't stand up to shoot. Bad things will happen.
Well, my dad and I were on the HomeQuest property, and there's a creek back there someplace, and we were told there was carp, sunfish, whatever.
Sunfish?
Yeah.
I can believe that there might be some bluegill or something in there, and they would, which is sunfish. I can honestly believe that because I know we used to go down there, and believe it or not, I grew up with a lot of Southern influence. Not so much my parents, but through family, friends, and relatives. And we would go down there and catch a whole bucket full of those bullheads.
Oh, yeah.
And they're really not bad eating if you're just,
Right.
and there was no limit on them. And there's always actually been, there's always been perch in that lake too. And it's not it's actually a fairly shallow lake in most places. There's a couple places there that are deeper, and it's mostly spring fed.
There's an overflow from Laxton Lake to Judson Lake that comes around on the kind of the west side.
Which is boundary lake is Judson Lake, yeah.
Right.
And that
Excuse me, where's the public access to Judson Lake?
probably Homequest Road would be one. They actually can't stop you from they can stop you from parking on the road, but they can't keep you from walking on the road and if you want to fish there or whatever. And that's actually the road that crosses the lake and then goes into the filbert orchard.
So you go past their house, past their farm where they sell the
Yeah,
product?
yeah,
You just keep going?
yeah, yeah.
I always felt like that was trespassing.
Well, I know
They,
They might think that too.
they might, but you have to be allowed access. That's that's state law. And I don't know. I'm not going to take a pro or con side on that one because I sometimes wonder why does the federal government own 51% of Washington State? That's
one story that Gerald told me about that I think is interesting about our Canadian friends. We have a gray squirrel problem down here now.
yeah.
Well, they had a gray squirrel problem in Stanley Park. And so they live trapped the squirrels out of Stanley Park and took them down to the border just north of Holmquist's orchard and
Really?
dumped them off.
Well,
How
yeah,
recent
that's-
was that?
That food, huh?
So,
When was
Probably,
this?
I don't know that we could ever really document that because it was sort of done in the dark of night, you know, type thing.
and I,
But they didn't want to kill the squirrels,
it's probably only
so they
been,
brought them down to the American side. And let 'em
I've
go.
only seen an infestation in the last 10 years or you know,
Oh, they're terrible.
and they are not, there's no limit. For those of you that like to eat squirrel, which is myself, there is no limit and there is no season.
And they're good.
And they are good.
They're fat. The only one problem is they have 2 litters a year.
Yeah.
Other squirrels only have 1 litter a year.
And they are also one of the most destructive pests that you can have.
The blacks are worse,
We have both,
at
trust
least
me.
on our orchard. The blacks are a little more aggressive than the.
But they will actually eat a hole into your house too. They are very destructive. I recommend, honestly, if you have any taste for squirrel meat or if you like to feed cats, to get rid of as many.
Yeah, the cats like them.
Terry, are you related to Eva?
I was.
Yes, Spur and Spud?
Yes, Spud, Joe, well, excuse me, no, Joe's of course gone now,
Yes.
but Spud is my first cousin.
Okay,
Joe
I
was also my first cousin.
Okay,
Eva, of course, was an aunt.
okay. She's a delightful lady. She was at the facility where I work.
Ah,
That's
yes.
it, yeah.
She was, I had two uncles that married 2 aunts, or 2
Married
brothers
sisters.
married 2 sisters.
Oh, really?
And they were actually orphans.
Oh,
Eva and Ethel were both orphans. And they married young. I think Eva was 16 when she married Ike. But yeah, there was the 2 sisters that came from an orphanage.
When did you graduated from NookChat?
I graduated from NookChat in 75.
75.
And I, just to throw in now after the taping is done, 1975 was the year of the bicentennial wagon train. I graduated, I applied for the position of the Washington State Outrider in 1975, well actually 1974. I applied for it. I got word probably 6 weeks before the end of school that I had been selected. And I graduated school May 28th of 1975. And June 8th of 1975, I was on a wagon train for the East Coast.
Wow.
Where would the wagon train start?
And believe it or not, the first wagon train started out of Blaine. We started out of Blaine. We crossed through the Peace Arch. I was one of the few people that actually got to go through the Peace Arch. And we started out with 3 wagons. We had the official wagon train wagon. We had the chuck wagon, and we had the Washington State wagon. If any of you ever knew Russ Johnson off the Dinkle Road, logger all his life and dairyman. He had the chuck wagon. Chuck Funderburg had the official wagon. And I can't remember the guy. No, Chuck Funderburg had the Washington State wagon. And I can't remember the gentleman who had I just can't remember anymore. Who had the official bicentennial wagon train wagon. But we went down the I-5 corridor. Pardon me.
On concrete?
Pardon?
On concrete?
Most of it was yeah. I mean, we went through like 99 where we could.
That must be hard on your horses.
It was hard. All our horses were all sharp shod with borium, or barium or borium. I don't remember exactly, which is an extremely hard material. And they all had that put on the shoes so that they would wear. And we would get about 4 weeks of road wear on those. All the wagons had wooden wheels with thick rubber pads around the wheels. they were hauled mostly with 2 horses, but at times we'd hook up a team of 4. Ray Glass, those of you who knew Ray Glass, taught me to drive, taught me to harness. A fine gentleman that I worked for years, hauling hay. I can remember there was Tom Dorn from Dorn's Riding Stables in Blaine, had 21 miniature mules hauling basically a reconditioned travel trailer, and they could actually drive from inside when the weather was bad, so they wouldn't get wet.
Airstream.
I had a slicker.
And where'd you end up?
I took it all the way to Casper, Wyoming. At that point, I'd run out of money. When it's easy to run out of money when you're 18 years old.
Did you follow the Oregon Trail?
We did follow part of the Oregon Trail. We got down to Mount Hood and then actually took most of the Oregon Trail. They actually shut down the I-5, the southbound bridge of I-5 while we put at Portland, in Vancouver, between Vancouver and Portland there. And we rode across that, which is a 1 mile long bridge. And I have to tell you right now, horses absolutely despise expansion joints. When Everett, we went through Everett, pretty much cut off, took the old roads as often as we could, and we went through the old cross the drawbridges in towards Everett and down Broadway, and came out in Linwood. At Linwood, we had the first marriage on a wagon train in 150 years. We got to Willow Creek, Oregon. Unfortunately, we also had the first death of a person on a wagon train, and it was the same person. He got married, and 2.5 months later, he passed away at 33 years old.
That was rough on him.
Massive heart attack. We were
He
in.
was having the time of his life.
No, actually, we
The
were
last
all.
2.5 months of his life.
We were actually all sitting there eating dinner, and he kind of went, "Oh," and so it was, yeah.
Married and buried.
Yeah, married and buried. Yep.
That's what my husband always says, it rhymes.
Well, I always cry at weddings. I mean, I hate to see good men down the tubes, but no recording. Sir.
Didn't Cap Galloway have something to do with cross-country horses?
Cap Galloway was a good friend of mine. Cap Galloway rode with us pretty much all the way.
I thought so.
I mean, as far as, see you later. Yeah, you too. Cap Galloway actually went down to about LaConner before he turned around and came back. Cap was still working, as a representative for Elm Boss Feed, and he had, 3 weeks, and he came down. And he met up with us again a couple other times and rode for a little while longer. Did any of you know Cap Galloway's?
Yeah.
Okay.
He lived on the Pangborn, didn't he?
No, he lived on the Haverstick.
It was one of those, I remember.
Yeah, he lived just a mile north of my parents' house. In fact, if you went, there was a road that used to go past that game reserve, and if you followed it all the way through the fields, you would end up just about at Cap Galloway's door. See that? Growing up with that game reserve right there was a real mixed blessing. I mean, we got a lot of hunters in on the first 2 weekends of hunting season. They would hunt they would release pheasants there. And but afterwards, it seemed like that's when we would get to go out after the first 2 weekends. And we might take 6 or 7 of us because we didn't have a dog. So a couple of us would run ahead and be bird dogs. And but yeah, there was they would release a lot of pheasants in there. And so here again, you know, regardless of how you feel about the shooting sports, it was a good way for kids to grow up. It was a lot of fun. It was, I don't regret a minute of the lifestyle that I lived in those days. We all have fond memories, I'm sure, but I got to not live in town, and that was probably the biggest benefit ever. Somebody once asked me when a gentleman that I worked with asked me one time, what's the best thing I ever raised on my farm? And I had to think for about a second, and I said, you know, the best thing I ever raised on the farm was my children. Mm-hmm. And I gave them a chance to develop a work ethic and keep them away from, I won't say unsavories, but to keep them away from the big towns and the nothing to do crowds. And you know, my children are a blessing, and I'm extremely happy with my life choices so far. I mean, I could have probably not rodeoed quite as many years, but
Too soon old and too late smart.
Yeah,
as the Amish
exactly,
used to say. Any other questions? Well, thank you, Terry.
you're welcome,
You did
sir.
a fine job.